lecture on American political ideas. And Elizabeth and Jay are right here in the audience. I want to thank you for Professor of Politics here at Villanova University and Director of the Matthew J. Ryan Center for the Study of Free Institutions and the Public Good. For those of you who may be new to the Ryan Center event, our goal is to foster an understanding of the principles and practices of free societies and the conditions of self-government. We're located in Old Hall, B304, a few stairs up, if you don't mind the walk, and we're always happy to welcome members and visitors to come and talk about ideas, talk about concerns, and to talk about public service. I hope you'll join us. Through public events like this lecture, and also through student and faculty reading groups, debates, sponsorship of visiting fellows, and support of the Freedom and Virtue Learning community, we work to cultivate a community of students, faculty, and citizens committed to the hard work of liberal education. And I'd like to recognize some of the leaders of liberal education here on Villanova's campus. The faculty who work in the trenches every day and put the students through the paces of an intense engagement with primary text and substantial associated written work, i.e. lots of reading. And that's the Augustine and Culture faculty, led by Dr. Mary Lou Hill. Thank you, Mary Lou, and thank you to everyone in the ACS program for everything that you do to make liberal education the foundation of Villanova's good work. I also want to thank Dr. Peter Donahue, also known as Father Peter Donahue, our president of Villanova, who is very supportive of liberal education here at Villanova and is here with us today. Father Peter? Besides Jay and Elizabeth McAndrews, IHS, for the Institute for Humane Studies, has also given their generous support to this event today. As some of you may know, IHS is dedicated to advancing the tenets of liberal education, free speech, open inquiry, and intellectual diversity on college campuses throughout the country. Thank you to IHS. Now, I always worry whether we'll get an audience at an event, but you put me at ease. Our speakers today, our conversationalists today, are Professors Robbie George and Cornel West. Professor George is a McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and the Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. Professor George has degrees from Swarthmore, Harvard Law School, and Harvard Divinity School. He received his doctorate in the philosophy of law from Oxford University. Professor George also holds 16 honorary degrees as well as numerous awards, including the United States Presidential Citizens Medal, the Honorific Medal for the Defense of Human Rights of the Republic of Poland, and the William Wilberforce Award. In addition, Robbie George is a former chairman of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, which, by the way, is now chaired by one of Robbie's students, Danielle Mark, who happens to be a professor here at Villanova. Robbie has also served on the President's Council on Bioethics and was a member of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. And he is a member of UNESCO's World Commission on the Ethics of Science and Technology. He's authored many articles and books, including Making Men Moral, Civil Liberties and Public Morality, and In Defense of Natural Law. Dr. Cornel West took his BA degree from Harvard and his MA and PhD from Princeton. There's a theme going on here, of course, at Harvard. He's taught at Princeton University, Union Theological Seminary, Yale University, and the University of Turin. He is currently professor of the practice of public philosophy and appointment at both Harvard Divinity School and Harvard's Department on African and African American Studies. Professor West has appeared as a frequent guest on political shows and networks, such as Late Night with Bill Maher, CNN, C-SPAN, and Democracy Now! He made his film debut in The Matrix Reloaded, to the 90s classic, and subsequently appeared in the trilogy's third film. He's authored over 20 books, including Race Matters, Democracy Matters, and most recently, Black Prophetic Fire. We are so very fortunate to have Professors George and West with us here today for such a timely and important conversation on the values, virtues, and challenges of liberal arts education. As you may know, they do not agree on every point, but one thing that they do agree upon is their respect and appreciation for the inherent value of liberal education and its vital connection to a healthy and free society. I believe it's fair to say that Robbie, George, and Cornel West are friends, both personal friends and civic friends. In our present era of civic fragmentation and enmity, not only across the country, but also and especially on college campuses, I know of no better example than Robbie and Cornel to show us what we might be to each other. Instead, if we are willing to take up the task of learning and pursuit of truth in the spirit they have adopted, that spirit seems to me to be malice towards none and charity to all. We'll start this afternoon with Professor George, followed by Professor West, and then followed by some questions from me and then questions from the audience. The focus of our conversation is on liberal education. Join me in welcoming Robbie George and Cornel West.
Thank you so much, Professor Sheehan. It's a great honor to be back at Villanova. We've both been here before. This is a very distinguished institution, and we consider the invitation to be here to be a great honor. Before saying anything else, let me add that it's also an honor to have with us here today the great sports journalist, James Brown, who just interviewed us. Will you welcome James Brown from CBS?
So, Father President, thank you for having us here at Villanova. It really is an honor to be here. And of course, it's never anything other than a joy to be with my beloved friend, Professor West. We have been teaching together at Princeton and going around the country doing programs like this for 11 years now. I go all the way back to 2007. And I have not only learned an enormous amount from Brother Cornel, just substantively, working over some of the great texts of the Western tradition in our classes together, including Augustine, by the way, Plato, Aristotle, Machiavelli, Mill, Hayek, Lewis, Marx, Buber, Dewey. Not only learned substantively from Cornel, but I've been inspired by his dedication to the life of the mind and by his sheer integrity. That, I think, is at the heart of this wonderful friendship that I'm blessed to enjoy with Cornel. He's a person who says what he means and who means what he says, and he is a person who is true to his principles. No matter which way they cut, if he sees something that he thinks is wrong, he will denounce it. If he thinks something is right, he will commend and praise it. He will not bend or twist in order to satisfy the demands of a tribe or of what is expected of him or a group or an ideological category. And that's something that we're going to talk about substantively today as a virtue, one of the virtues of liberal arts education, and something that I hope will be able to persuade you is really at the heart of the educational mission of an institution such as Villanova. So we're here to talk about the values, virtues, and challenges of liberal arts education. I probably don't have to say much to you about the challenges of liberal arts education today. To begin with, it's expensive. Your parents or benefactors pay a lot of money, those of you who are students, for you to come here. Perhaps you've taken out loans, heavy loans, in order to be here. It is expensive. Now, I have my own views about how we might be able to reduce the expense of liberal arts education because I believe it's much more expensive than it needs to be, but that's not a conversation for today. The fact is, it is expensive, and that's a challenge. It's also true that the world has changed technologically. The world has changed in terms of employment opportunities for our young people. The economy has changed. And so institutions, including Villanova, feel the pressure to adjust their curriculum, to adjust their program to the demands of a 21st century economy, to training young men and women who will be able to take their place in a 21st century economy. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on institutions and on parents and on students to move education away from the classical liberal arts ideal to technical and vocational training. Now, there's nothing wrong with technical and vocational training. And it's good and necessary that institutions, including our liberal arts institutions, train people in such a way that they will be able to find good jobs, high-paying jobs, jobs that will enable them to enjoy high social status. There's nothing wrong with those things. Those are good things in themselves. But they come with dangers. And that's the dangers of compromising the liberal arts ideal, hanging on to it just in name, just rhetorically, just in theory, while compromising it away in the actual curriculum and program of the university. And I want to encourage you, this institution, very strongly to resist that. Now, to understand why that is worth resisting, why those pressures should not be succumbed to, we're going to have to talk about the values of liberal arts education, values that make it worth meeting the challenges. When we ask, what's a liberal arts education really for? It's easy to understand that it's not for vocational training, that the fundamental reason for liberal arts education is not to enable people to be rich, enable people to have high social standing, enable people to enjoy prestige, whatever we might say about those things, and I've already said they're not bad in themselves. That's not why you study Plato and St. Augustine and John Locke and Thomas Aquinas and Immanuel Kant and Shakespeare and Dante and Toni Morrison, Martin Luther King. That's not the reason. So what is the reason? We're tempted, under the pressure of the challenges we face today, to say, and how often have you heard this said, the real value of a liberal arts education is to train us to be critical thinkers so that we can then be of value to banks and insurance companies and law firms and tech companies and Google and Microsoft who need critical thinkers more than they need vocationally educated people, technically educated people. And you know what? That's not false. That's true. If you ask business leaders in all of those sectors, if you could have a person who's got the technical training, if you could choose between a person who has the technical training and a person who is trained as a critical, sharp thinker, who would you choose? And they'd all say the critical, sharp thinker. And it is true that engagement with the great ideas and the great texts and the great thinkers of the Western and other traditions will make you a critical thinker. But that is still to miss, just to veer off and miss the fundamental point of a liberal arts education. It is still to instrumentalize liberal arts education to something else. Or you've heard it said that a good liberal arts education will train us to be better advocates for justice and community organizers and activists. And that's also true because critical thinkers are going to be better advocates for the causes they believe in, whether they happen to be on the left or the right. But still, that's an instrumentalization of liberal arts education. And the most fundamental values of liberal arts education are non-instrumental values. Professor Sheehan, just a moment ago in her lovely introduction, talked about the inherent value of liberal arts education. Inherent or intrinsic is as opposed to instrumental or instrumentalized, whether instrumentalized to making money, having prestige, social standing, joining a law firm, joining a tech company, joining a bank, or instrumental to social activism or anything else. A non-instrumental value is something that is inherently enriching of the human being, or to use the words of Martin Luther King, whose legacy we're celebrating this week, elevating of the human personality and spirit. And there is the fundamental point and value of a liberal arts education. What you offer here in the Augustinianism and Culture Seminar, in the humanities curriculum, but well beyond those, in the spirit of this university, permeating things, even when it comes to the technical areas of computer science and engineering and so forth. Your students still study the art subjects, the pure sciences. And the point of that is the inherent enrichments, the elevation of the spirit and personality that are available by engaging with the great thinkers and the great texts that you do encounter when you take your Villanova education seriously. But it goes beyond even that. It's not just that it is inherently elevating to learn things for their own sakes, even if not instrumental, to appreciate the insights, the wisdom of Plato or St. Augustine, or to enjoy the wit and the wisdom of Shakespeare in the plays or in the sonnets. Liberal arts education offers something even more profound than that, and that is the opportunity to live an examined life. The opportunity to be self-critical, to evaluate, to interrogate, to criticize what you've inherited and what you believe. The ability to put your own practices and preferences and desires and goals and feelings and emotions under the microscope and decide intelligently whether I want to affirm them or distance myself from them. Plato teaches us, in the mouth of Socrates, that the examined life is not only important, but it's the only life really worth leading. I don't know how far down the road we'd want to go with Plato on that, but there's no doubt that there's special value in the leading of an examined life. And that's what a liberal arts education, when it's serious and when you take it seriously, makes possible. And what a blessing it is that there are places like Villanova where students like you can come to learn to live, to get the tools, to be empowered to live an examined life. Now, I suspect some of you who are humanities majors or English or philosophy or history majors have probably been to a Thanksgiving dinner or to a family wedding or other event where you run into Uncle Charlie or Uncle Harry or Aunt Sally. And they say, what are you studying at Villanova? Got a great basketball team there. I'm proud of your basketball team, by the way. But what are you studying at Villanova? Oh, I'm studying philosophy, or I'm studying history. And Uncle Charlie or Aunt Sally says, tell me if I'm telling the truth. What are you going to do with that? Yeah, you heard that? I'm telling the truth. What you going to do with that? And your answer is, I'm going to lead an examined life. Now, Uncle Charlie or Aunt Sally might be scratching his or her head about that, wondering what's going on here at $65,000, whatever it costs you a year. By the way, I'm so grateful to, speaking of money, so grateful to McAndrews for putting up the dough to make these lectures possible. That's such a wonderful thing for you to do, and we're so appreciative. I know I speak for Cornell as well as myself on that as well. But that's what it's about, the examined life. And you know what? It goes even a step beyond that, and I'm going to ask Brother Cornell in a little while to take us even a step beyond this step. But an examined life will be a life in which you are liberated from the most abject form of slavery. There's no form of slavery that's good, except from a Christian point of view, being a slave to Christ. There's no form of human slavery that's good. They're all bad, wicked. But the most abject is when we allow ourselves by our own free choices and actions to be slaves to our own passions, slaves to our own desires, not masters of ourselves, but at the mercy of feelings and whims and passions, which may or may not be so good. We pity a person, we should pity a person who has no self-control, no self-mastery, who's at the mercy, enslaved to his passions. We think of an addict, but in the human condition, we are all potential addicts no matter whether we ever touch a drop of alcohol or use crack or heroin. In the human condition, we are all in danger. We all must fight against being enslaved to our base desires. There's a lot of good in us, but there's a lot of bad in us. St. Augustine has something to say about that. St. Paul has something to say about the fallenness of the human being. We are all potentially at the mercy of our basest desires, and yet, made in the image and likeness of God, as we are, we have the capacity to be masters of ourselves, to not be enslaved to our own desires. And part of what can make that possible is this engagement with the great thinkers and the great texts that are on offer in a liberal arts education. We are taught by these thinkers. We are inspired by them. And they can be literary people, they can be musical people. It's not just philosophers. There are different media by which this empowerment can be effectuated. But what it is an empowerment to do is to be masters of ourselves, to make judgments about what is in fact good, how I should live. The basic question that we all face is, what does it mean to be a human being? Because we have to ask that question in order to figure out, what should I do with my life? Life is short. I know when you're young, when I was young, it seemed long. It was a long horizon. I was going to get everything done. But you will discover, and if you think about it, you know already, life is short. What are you going to do with it? You have amazing powers, the powers of rationality and freedom of the will. Unlike any other terrestrial creature we know about. Cornell's very fond of elephants. They have many virtues. So far as we know, they don't have the power of freedom of the will. But we human beings do. We can decide what to do with the lives that we have been given. Existentialist philosophers talk about how we live lives that are thrown. We're thrown into the world. We're thrown. Here we are. Suddenly we're here. Don't know where we came from. Don't know where we're going. Don't know what to do. And yet we have the power to decide what to do. But deciding what to do will require us thinking very critically about what it means to be a human being, what it means to lead a human life, what is worthwhile, what is worth the limited time we have, what is to be done, what is not to be done, what is just, what is unjust, what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. We needn't simply be doing whatever emotion, feeling, passion, desire tells us. We can choose on the basis of reasons, apprehended by the power of what Aristotle calls the practical intellect. And a liberal arts education serves those values. Now, what are the virtues? I've talked about the challenges. I've talked about the values. The virtues are the traits of character that are necessary in each of us if we are to pursue those values, if we are to be masters of ourselves, if we are to lead fully human lives, the lives that we can lead as human beings. Now, there are many virtues that are essential to leading human life. I want to focus on the ones that are so critical. So critical. to the intellectual enterprise. Yeah. Don't say I never gave it. And these are pretty straightforward, but hard to live up to. Takes effort. One is humility, intellectual humility. Now, we academic types, we professors, we're not known for the virtue of humility. You don't ordinarily get tenure on the basis of humility. You're showing off. You're showing what you can accomplish. You're showing that you know something somebody else does, nobody else knows. You've accomplished something in mathematics or physics or history or political science that nobody else has. So that's cutting against the virtue that I want to celebrate here. But it is a virtue, and it's a necessary virtue. The one thing that we all know in this room, every single one of us right this moment, we know that some of our beliefs are untrue. You raise your hand out there if I'm wrong about this and you actually don't know that some of your beliefs are untrue. There's never been a hand gone up when I've asked that question. I know some of the beliefs I now hold are untrue. You know what the problem is? I don't know which ones they are. Each individual belief I believe because I think it's true. Otherwise I wouldn't believe it. I believe something else. But I know I'm not infallible. I know some of what I believe isn't true. And I know if I believe in the inherent value of knowledge, that it is to my benefit, to my flourishing, elevating of me, if I can move from error when I'm in error to truth, or from an inadequate appreciation or understanding of truth to a more adequate understanding and appreciation of truth. But I'm never going to get there until I admit, not just notionally, that I am fallible, that I could be wrong about some things, that I am wrong about some things. And once I do recognize that, not merely notionally, but existentially, then I recognize I need to be a little humble. I need to have intellectual humility. I need to open myself up to criticism from my brother Cornel West or from my sister Colleen Sheehan or from any of you. It's like criticism, which is aimed not at hurting me or harming me, but moving me from error or an inadequate understanding of truth nearer to the truth. And obviously that requires another virtue, open-mindedness. Now, no one wants you to be so open-minded that your brain falls out. G.K. Chesterton famously said the purpose of an open mind isn't to remain open, but it's to close on something solid, like the purpose of an open mouth, Chesterton says. It's to close on something solid. But that's individually as we make judgments, but always tentative, always open to revision, always open to counter-argument, always open to new evidence. But the general attitude has to be one of open-mindedness, one recognizing I've got some things to learn. But that means you need then a third virtue. This is very critically important. The virtue of courage. Because when we open our minds, when we admit our fallibility, when we recognize that we not only can be, but we are wrong about some things, we make ourselves vulnerable. And we human beings, quite naturally, do not want to be vulnerable. We don't want to be shown to be right. It's embarrassing. It's humiliating. It's hard to change our minds, at least publicly change our minds, because that's to admit weakness, which we don't like to do. It takes courage, real courage, to bring down those walls by which we try to protect ourselves from vulnerability. And that courage is always in short supply in human affairs. Now, we human beings, another thing that we, by nature, do is wrap our emotions more or less tightly around our convictions. Now, that's in itself not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. It's a necessary thing. If we didn't have an emotional commitment to the things we believe in, we would never get anything done. You know, turn ourselves into good athletes if that is what we want to do. That takes more than just thinking, you know what, I should make myself into a good athlete. You got to get up, you got to do the push-ups, you got to do the sit-ups, you got to do the practice, you got to do the work. It takes discipline. And you're never going to muster that without an emotional commitment.
Without an emotional commitment, you'll never work for any good cause. You won't feed the hungry, care for the poor, struggle for justice. And yet, if we wrap our emotions too tightly around our convictions, we will become dogmatists. We will not want to listen to other people. We'll lose the virtues of intellectual humility, open-mindedness, and we'll never be able to muster the courage to make ourselves vulnerable. And we will perceive any criticism of a view we hold as a personal attack on us. We'll identify our very selves, we'll bind up our own identities in those convictions in such a way as to interpret a critique as an assault. And there goes the educational enterprise. There goes intellectual engagement. In fact, there goes the democratic experiment. Because civic friendship of the sort that's a foundational principle of democracy can never flourish where people are dogmatists, unwilling to listen to the other side, to consider that they might be wrong, even about their deepest, most cherished, identity-forming beliefs. Without that, there can be no pursuit of truth. There can be no democratic life. So we need to cultivate those virtues in ourselves. And parents and teachers and educational institutions need to be about the business of forming young men and women to have those virtues. And scholars and leaders, above all, need to exemplify those virtues, model them for young people. One of the things they need to demonstrate is that there can be true friendship, not just cordiality. Cordiality is good. If it's the best you can do, fine. But we need more than cordiality. We need true friendship, which means engagement across the lines of ideological, political, religious difference. These are issues people care about. You need to be able to engage each other and love each other and respect each other and honor each other despite these disagreements. Without all of those virtues, and I mean all of them, that's not going to be possible. You just have some of them, it won't be possible. You need all of them, including that virtue of courage, if you are to honor the true values of liberal arts learning. With that, let me hand it over to my brother Cornel West. Yeah.
Let me first say it's a blessing to return to Villanova. One of the finest human beings I ever met in my life is associated with this place. His name is Brother Jim Wetzel. And give it up for Brother Wetzel. He's just a special person. Very special indeed. I want to salute the captain of the ship, my new brother, Peter Donahue. And the very idea of knowing that someone comes from the tradition of Eugene O'Neill and Tennessee Williams and August Wilson and Lorraine Hansberry and Stephen Sondheim as a theater man running an institution of higher learning puts joy in my heart. Give it up for our dear brother president. Oh, what a blessing to have you here. What a blessing. My new sister, Colleen Sheehan. Oh, we've had a wonderful time already. We've had a long day. We arrived at 12. We hit the ground running, and we are still moving. And we're glad to be moving. And then Sister Elizabeth and Brother J.J. McAndrews, we've always had a wonderful time with you at lunch. It's good to have you here as well. And it is true, we have a giant in the U.S. international television. He's a high-quality journalist. He was my suite mate, a kind of roommate at Harvard College in the Neolithic age years ago. He was one of the finest athletes ever, played basketball at Harvard, and he is one of the finest minds and hearts and souls on 60 Minutes, Fox News, CBS News, sports. I'm talking about JB, James Brown. Give it up for our one and only James Brown. We are blessed to have you here with CBS. And I know Brother Alvin, I don't know Brother Alvin's here somewhere as well, as executive producer. But I know we got limited times. Let me get to the point. This week we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. He's not an isolated icon. He's a wave in an ocean of a tradition of a people who have been hated for 400 years but taught the world so much about how to love truth, how to love goodness, how to love justice, how to love beauty when he was a Christian, how to love God, the holy. One of the most powerful eulogies ever written for the dear brother Martin Luther King Jr. was written by a vanilla Catholic sister named Dorothy Day. She's one of the greatest prophetic figures of the 20th century. And that eulogy begins April 5th, 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily. Liberal arts education, what the Greeks call paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A. That's deep education, not cheap schooling. We're not talking about cheap schooling at Villanova. We're talking about deep education. And what Dorothy Day meant was that Martin Luther King Jr. was open to paideia, because paideia is about learning how to die in order to learn how to live well. When Plato said philosophy, love of wisdom, meditation on, and a preparation for death, he didn't mean just physical death. He meant there is no growth, no development, there is no maturity reached without a learning how to die in order for forms of rebirth to emerge intellectually, spiritually, morally. Montaigne, the giant of early European philosophy, Catholic but complicated. The inventor of the genre of the essay itself in the middle part of the 16th century. He has a chapter called "To Philosophize is to Learn How to Die," building on the notion of paideia, what we call liberal arts education. And then Seneca, and we don't expect too much profundity from the Romans, since they were running an empire rather than thinking deeply about the issues of what it means to be human for the most part, very much like the USA. We'll get to that. But Seneca said, he or she who learns how to die unlearns slavery, linked precisely to my very dear brother Robbie. It's always a joy to be in dialogue with my brother. We're not just friends, we're brothers. We've got a companionship. He might be wrong on some issues, which I think he is. He thinks I'm wrong on some issues. But the deep joys of companionship and friendship are always deeper than political difference and ideological contestation. But when Seneca says he or she learns how to die unlearns slavery, the psychic bondage, intellectual bondage, emotional bondage, to break free, to be awakened, as it were. So when we think of learning how to die in order to learn how to live, the first move is the formation of attention. The great Simone Weil talked about education as a formation of attention. How do we learn to attend to the things that matter and turn away from the superficial, ephemeral things that matter less? How do you learn how to wrestle with life and death and joy and sorrow as opposed to ephemeral pleasures and instant gratification and superficial success? How do you learn to cultivate a habitual vision of greatness that has little to do with that which is gigantic in the world, but has everything to do with the cultivation of a critical self and a compassionate person as you undergo the process of learning how to die in order to learn how to live well. Anytime you examine critically an assumption or presupposition you have and decide to give it up, it's a form of death. Anytime there's a dogma or a doctrine that you interrogate intensely and give it up, James Brown said, give it up, turn it loose. Give it up, turn it loose. It's a form of bondage. You need to grow. Shatter your tribalism, shatter your provincialism, shatter your parochialism. Connect with the challenges of the world and all of its mysteries and all of its challenges. Are you willing to embark on that courageous adventure, what the great Alfred North Whitehead called adventures of ideas? Do you have enough courage to venture out in uncharted territory, learning how to die in order to learn how to live well? That's what Martin Luther King Jr. did. Not because he's a king or deity, not because he's pure, pristine, not because he's free of spot or wrinkle. He was a fallen, fallible human being like anybody else, but he was shaped by a tradition that lived in the midst of social death, slavery, white supremacist slavery, of civic death, American terrorism, of Jim Crow and lynching, spiritual death, taught to hate himself because he was told he had the wrong color on his nose shape. And in the face of those forms of death, what did he do? He fell back on voices of the past that enabled him to move from being an echo to finding his voice. And there's no accident that the very anthem of black people is what? Lift every voice. Is not lift every echo. And if you're an echo, you are still caught within the chains of conformity. If you're an echo, you still think that somehow in all of your arrogance that you don't have forms of learned ignorance. And all of us have forms of learned ignorance. And therefore we continually need to criticize, interrogate, scrutinize ourselves, learning how to die in order for rebirth to take place. So when you graduate from this place, I think graduation is May 18th or 19th, is that right? For seniors, do I have the days right? You know, May 19th is Malcolm X's birthday. Y'all gonna graduate on Malcolm X's birthday? Oh, that's a beautiful day. Yes, indeed, indeed, indeed. But when you graduate, you look at each other and say, did you learn how to die? Yes, I did. You still trying to? Absolutely. Then go up and get your diploma with a smile. And thank God you didn't waste your mama's and daddy's or grandparents' money, because there's a whole lot of cash flowing. But this is very serious business, because all of us need each other in order to do this. You don't do it all by yourself. You do it by means of dialogue. That's what we love about the Platonic Dialogues. We may be suspicious of Platonism, but those Platonic Dialogues themselves, the drama of engaging in argument in which the turning of the soul is always a possibility, the formation of an attention tied to the cultivation of a critical self, which results in the maturation of a loving person. And that love of truth, we never ever possess or have a monopoly on truth. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, so that you hope, are able to muster the courage to engage in a quest for truth. Brother JJ told me he made the contribution based on a concern about the quest for truth. Isn't that right, my brother? Exact words. And of course, that quest for truth is an open-ended one. He has no control over it. There's a variety of different voices bouncing up against each other, the voices of the quick and the voices of the dead. And what is wonderful about the humanities, of course, is that the English word human derives from the Latin humando, which means burial. That's also what I love about elephants. They bury their dead like us, but that's another lecture. But we bury our dead to make sure they're treated with dignity so that we can connect the lives of the quick with the lives of those who are gone. And those voices of the past. It could be a Gandhi in India. It could be a Mandela in Africa. It could be Maria Tequi in Peru. It could be Shakespeare in London. It can be Diderot in Paris. It can be Hegel in Berlin. It could be Kendrick Lamar in Compton. It could be Erykah Badu in Dallas. It could be your voice. It could be my voice, trying to embody and enact the values, virtues, challenges of Paideia. And you do it because there's joy in it. It's not simply instrumental. It's not just utilitarian. It's not just consequentialist. It's not some kind of philosophic calculus to see what kind of pleasure you can maximize. But it's a way of life that provides certain joys in dialogue, in reveling into humanity, in the free play of intelligence, in the use of words in such a way that it might allow you to find yourself empowered in ways you know not of. But our day, and there's a wonderful text by Tim Wu, published about 1.5 years ago, called The Attention Merchants. In our day, there's a fight for the attention, especially the attention of young people, you see, to make sure you're not attending to the things that matter, but you're attending to the sunlight prison of hedonism, or the iron cage of egoism, the titillation and stimulation rather than critical reflection of those enduring issues. How do you convince yourself that the most important things are worth attending to? I mean, we live in a moment of spiritual blackout in the history of this nation, the history of this empire. And what is spiritual blackout? It's the relative eclipse of integrity and honesty and decency and courage. And no one party has a monopoly. There's no doubt the White House is a nice place to start if we want to sign a symptom of spiritual blackout. But old brother Trump is not to be fetishized. He is as American as cherry pie. He's not out there all by himself. He comes out of traditions in this nation. And he's elected not all by himself. And of course, the reality is that what is inside of Brother Trump is also in part inside of each and every one of us. Because there's a civil war taking place on the battlefield of our own souls. And the same cowardice, the same contempt, the same hatred is something all of us have to come to terms with. I saw that when I looked in the face of neo-Nazi brothers in Charlottesville. I looked at him dead up in their faces. I said, yes, you were made in the image of God just like me. It's just that you choose to be a gangster. Of course, they didn't like that, but I said it in love. I said it in love. And then he came back and I said, that's right, I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. So I'm not calling you a name because I'm part of the same continuum as you are. You're a human being just like me. You made in the image of God just like me. I'm just making different choices. And so it is as we approach each other in regard to these values and virtues and challenges of a liberal arts education within a very, very elite formal context. But the role of the artist becomes very important. I thank God for Curtis Mayfield, who dropped out of school in the 8th grade but went on to create some of the most beautiful music and melodies and lyrics, which meant that he didn't go to college, but a college went through him. He still underwent paideia, even though he never got his diploma. He didn't need it because it was cultivated within his own subculture of musicians on the south side and west side of Chicago. Thank God Miles Davis dropped out of Juilliard in order to learn from a genius named Charlie Parker. So we're not just talking about liberal arts education in the formal sense. It's formal and informal through networks and relationships and affiliations that spill over from the gown to town, from the academy to the community. And these days for young people, the most frightening challenge, and I'll turn this over to my dear sister, the most frightening challenge is that we more and more live in a culture that rewards indifference and encourages callousness and makes those who opt for compassion losers. And if it's all about just winning, if the dominant soul craft in this culture is for precious young people of all colors to be the smartest in the room and the richest in the room, then what happens to wisdom? What happens to compassion? Let the phones be smart, you be wise. Let the phones be smart, you got to be wise. And all the riches in the world can still leave you so poverty-ridden in your soul and in your heart that you still reach for self-medication. You still reach for addiction. You still reach for instant gratification. You still reach for that next ephemeral pleasure, and you end up on a joyless quest for insatiable pleasure. So there's still an emptiness and a vacuity shot through your soul, even though your body is so titillated and stimulated, you don't know what to do. That's what we're talking about in terms of the challenges of paideia in a market-driven civilization that too often worships the fetishes created by magnificent scientific and technological breakthroughs, but does little to nourish the soul, does little to nurture the courage, and not just the courage, because we know Nazi soldiers can be courageous and they still are gangsters. We want courage and magnanimity, courage and greatness of character. That's what fortitude is. Fortitude, probably the greatest tradition of moral and spiritual fortitude in this nation. It's the musical tradition. That's why I was glad to see the piano in the center. You see, because there's something about the artist as the vanguard of the species and the musicians as the vanguard of the artists, so that in the unbelievable maturation and courage and willingness to push to the edge of life's abyss, we have a sense of what it is to be truly those who live by learning how to die and end up reborn. That's what you hear in John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. That's what you hear in Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. That's what you hear in a Stephen Sondheim, Sweeney Todd. Artists of the highest level, Beethoven and Chopin, teaching us by example what it is to criticize, interrogate themselves, and still provide in sonic form or architectural form on the canvas some sense of awakening, critical intelligence working, wounded hearts bleeding, but also reaching out for each and every one of us to be better than we are. And the future of America, the future of democracy rests on it. The great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say the very future of America depends on the influence and impact of Martin Luther King Jr. and the tradition that produced him. Now, what did our dear brother mean? What did our dear Jewish brother mean? He says, not depending on one man, what goes into the making of that kind of love warrior, if we lose sight of what goes into the making of a Martin King, what goes into the making of a Heschel or a Dorothy Day, you see, then we lose what is required for a democratic project. Because public life is weakened, wealth inequality escalates, greed runs amok, hedonism, narcissism, out of control, and you end up with survival of the slickest and the richest and the smartest, and most others obsessed, including the richest and the slickest and the smartest, obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. And that's very much where we are too often today. Lack of accountability, who's going to get caught, who can get away with it, who can get over by any means in order to be successful, independent of the integrity of the process by which you do gain access to so-called success, which means that everything is at stake when we talk about paideia, and that's why I love to be in dialogue with my brother, because when we recognize everything is at stake, even given our disagreements, we empower and enable and ennoble each other as brothers across race. I'd say religion. I'm Baptist and he's Catholic, so that's a gap, that's a hiatus, but we still Christians now. But even if I was Muslim, even if I was agnostic, even if I was atheistic, I would love him and he would love me in terms of the quality of our friendship and companionship.
Thanks very much, Cornel and Robbie. And I want to say that that piano at the Ryan Center with the Chopin music on it is played beautifully by Dr. Brian Satterfield on a regular basis. And it's enjoyable to walk down the hall and walk in and hear that kind of music wafting from the halls. It's lovely to be part of the academic mod squad for an afternoon. Let me ask a couple of questions. The first is, America was once thought to be on the verge of disunion. And it took some pretty strong, potent political and moral medicine to get us past that crisis, to reunite us as a people. Some people think today that we're at a similar kind of crossroads, if not crisis. And it's not just about red states and blue states. It's not just partisanship. It seems to go much deeper than that. It seems to go to questions such as, issues such as, what do we stand for most fundamentally? What does it mean to be human? What's the meaning of rights and where do they come from? How should we live our lives? And those kinds of disagreements are disagreements that we find not only in politics, but are at the heart of liberal education. Can we get past this today? Some people think that there's a gap that's becoming more and more unbridgeable. I get the impression that you two are more optimistic, but if so, can we get past it, and if so, how? If not, where do we go from here? That's one question. Second question is, Cornel, at lunch today, you mentioned that when I asked you, what's on your mind? You said, well, one of the things that's on my mind is the young people of today and their wounded souls. You didn't say the corruption in America today. You said folks with wounded souls. I wondered if you and Robbie as well might talk a little bit more about that.
You want to begin with the last one, Cornel?
Well, I just spoke so long, maybe we should let you say that. Is that all right? Yeah, just be fair.
Right, I was trying to get some time to think about how to answer. That didn't work. Was it Lincoln who talked about the mystic chords of memory that reach from every hearth in the home to every patriot grave will again stir the chorus of the Union? That's our question. Because I do think we have a crisis. Now, I don't think we're on the verge of a shooting war, but no one ever does until it is too late. We are certainly experiencing a wide-scale erosion, and I fear that soon we'll have to speak in even stronger terms of a collapse of civic friendship. And civic friendship is an absolutely indispensable condition of self-government. It helps to have civic friendship even when people are subjects and not citizens, even when they're governed by, let's assume for the sake of argument, a benign despot. But it's essential, indispensable that we have civic friendship in a republic, a government not only of the people, which after all government is, and not only for the people, which all good government is, even government of a benevolent despot, but government by the people, civic friendship, Republican government. If you don't have civic friendship, disagreements turn us into enemies. And you cannot sustain a republic among people who regard themselves as each other's enemies. The Federalist Papers, as you know, Colleen, you're a great teacher of the subject, were written by Hamilton and Madison and Jay to persuade their fellow citizens to ratify the proposed Constitution. And the great challenge was, how can we make Republican government work? Now, why was that a challenge? Because everywhere else in human history, every place else on the planet, Republican government had been tried, it had failed. Republican government had been a failure, often a spectacular failure. And so many people came to believe, on the basis of empirical evidence, historical experience, that republicanism was simply impossible, that human beings are not the kinds of creatures that can be self-governing. They're not the kinds of creatures fit for Republican government. And yet, our founding fathers wanted to give it one more chance. They thought they could make it work, in part by the mechanisms of the Constitution. So if we look at Federalist number 1, if we look at Federalist number 10, we see the argument being made for how this constitutional setup can get us around the problems that had condemned to oblivion and failure all past efforts at Republican government. Madison in number 10 tells us about faction. What destroys republics, if you go back and look at them, in the Renaissance and the medieval period, back into the ancient world? Faction. What is faction? It's fellow citizens treating each other as enemies. It's tribalism. It's clannishness. It's seeing myself as a member of the us group that is against the them group. And of course, Lincoln, when he prayed at the end of the second inaugural address, ending with a prayer, when he prayed that this nation, under God, will find a new birth of freedom, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people will not perish from the earth. Why did he say the earth? Why didn't he say will not perish from the North American landmass or continent? Because he knew that this was republicanism's last chance, self-government's last chance. It had failed everywhere else. Our founders were brilliant men. They had their flaws, they had their problems, but they were brilliant men. They proposed a solution around the problem of faction. And if it failed here, and civil war, secession meant failure, that's why Lincoln opposed secession. He could have let the South go, saved 750,000 lives, but he didn't. Why? Why was he willing to accept the carnage? He explains in the second inaugural address. So that government, Republican government, government by the people, not just of and for the people, will not perish from the earth. He knew the failure of the American experiment meant the failure of republicanism forever. at least as far out as anybody could see. But one of the things that the war should have taught us, and it's something the founders themselves anticipated if you read closely in the Federalist Papers, it's often missed, but it's there, is that even the best constitutional structures, the best institutional arrangements in the world, and ours are very, very good, do not constitute a machine that can go by itself, that can substitute for civic virtue and civic friendship.
That's right.
Those constitutional structures are necessary but not sufficient for the survival of Republican government, for the success of the American experiment in ordered liberty. We got a civil war because of a lack of civic virtue and civic friendship. Slavery is the highest sign of the lack of civic virtue, excluding an entire race of people from the community, relegating them to slaves to be exploited. But it also became the occasion for the collapse of civic friendship. People could not recognize each other as fellow citizens, to the point where some said, "We will not be fellow citizens with you." Now, it wasn't the first proposal for secession. Colleen and those of you who are students know that there were New England states that had proposed seceding earlier. They didn't want to be civic friends with those Southern slaveholders. That didn't come to that. It did come to it eventually on the other side with the Southern states seceding. But my goodness, now that we have the horrible lesson of the Civil War, let's at least get something out of all that carnage. Let's take the lesson that we need civic virtue and we need civic friendship. And that means that we need those virtues of open-mindedness, intellectual humility, courage. Cornel rightly introduced the virtue of fortitude, the virtue of constancy, the virtue of mercy. We can add to them when we're going beyond the academy to the larger culture. We need all of those virtues if we are to rebuild and secure civic friendship. But, you know, Colleen, institutions, including educational institutions, preeminently educational institutions, have a very important role to play in this. Because if we cannot talk with each other and engage each other as friends in the intellectual culture, it's never going to happen beyond this. I mean, if we regard each other as enemies because we happen to disagree, even if we disagree on important matters, not just, you know, whether the minimum wage should be $15 or $10 or whatever, where we disagree not only about means to agreed upon ends, but sometimes even upon ends, if we can't muster what it takes to sustain civic friendship in the intellectual culture, if we destroy freedom here, if we yield to the pressures of ideological conformism, if we shout down speakers, if we disinvite people, if we refuse to listen to an alternative point of view, if we fail, there's no way that in the broader political culture we're going to be able to maintain the quality of civic friendship necessary for Republican government. But I am, you say optimistic, maybe that's right, but I'd like to think rather that what I am, and I think what Brother Cornel is hopeful. Optimism is a matter of optics. It's what you see or choose to see. Hope is a virtue. It's another virtue. It's one of the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love. But I think we have grounds for our hope, not only the ultimate grounds for those of us who are religious and who believe in God's redemptive power and believe in salvation through Jesus Christ. Not just that, as important as that is for those of us who are Christian believers. It's that we recognize that in human affairs, revival, reawakening, renewal, rebirth are possible. Some of the great good guys began as bad guys. Dorothy Day is a great Christian saint. I think she'll be recognized soon, canonized as a saint. She didn't begin that way. If you know the story of Dorothy's life. Certainly Augustine, yeah. Professor Sheehan rightly reminds us, Augustine didn't begin that way. And Augustine teaches us that there's that gangster. He calls it original sin. Christians call it original sin. That's that gangster in all of
of us to be overcome. But it can be. Now, we Christians, those of us who are Christians, have a story about that. It's through the power of God, through the grace of God that it's overcome. But it can be overcome. It can be turned around. And we can reach out to each other across the lines of ideological or political or religious difference and embrace each other as friends, as brothers and sisters, as companions on a journey. In the academic and the intellectual culture, that journey has as its goal truth attaining. We're trying to get at the truth. We do that together. By arguing, yes. Dialectically, as the philosophers would label it, yes. But the common goal, the common good, in fact, the common goal constitutes a common good, a good for the interlocutors. As much as they may disagree, they're still trying to get at the truth. And if they love truth more than they love their opinions, if they haven't fallen so deeply in love with their opinions that they're unwilling to put them at risk for the sake of truth, they have in common a desire, a love of truth, then that common bond is much more powerful than anything that could divide them. Whatever their disagreement is, they're working together in a common project. I find myself doing this with Brother Cornel all the time. In our classes together, in our lectures late at night sometimes, in a hotel restaurant, having a glass of wine, exploring a difficult question, may have different perspectives on it, may disagree about it, listening to each other, long pauses in the conversation, not because we don't have anything to say, but each of us thinking about what the other has said. And that can't be just some idiosyncratic feature of the lives of two eggheads. That is something that is possible for everybody, but it's got to be promoted. It's got to be formed. Our young people have to be formed to adopt that attitude, to strive for those virtues.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, I did start with the wounded souls, because one of the most important challenges of each and every one of us with wounded souls is to choose whether we'll be wounded healers or wounded hurters. How will you transform and transfigure your pain in such a way that you will empower others, or you will demean and demonize and disempower others? I talked earlier briefly about some of the possible parallels between the decline and fall of the Roman Empire versus the decline and fall of the American Empire. You can imagine when the American Gibbon puts pen to paper, there will be some similarities. Military overreach, 4,800 military units, over 800 around the world, special operations in 120 countries, military budget. For every dollar, 53 cents immediately goes to the military-industrial complex. Where is the money for education? Where is the money for decent housing? Where is the money for health care? Where is the money for jobs with a living wage, given markets that are regulated under just ideals? You see, the corruption of political elites, economic elites, cultural elites, that's what Gibbon was talking about in the Roman Empire. You see, and a culture of weapons of mass distraction to keep folk distracted from the things that they ought to be attending to if they're going to reproduce the best that has been bequeathed to them from the past. You see, that's Gibbon's insight about Rome, learning about America. When in the 1860s we had disunion, it took the barbaric Civil War, the 750,000, and especially those last 200,000 black soldiers that helped push the Union over. If it had remained a thoroughly vanilla affair, it could have ended differently. Lincoln was open at the very end to that multiracial army to break the back of the violent insurrection to overthrow the U.S. government in the name of perpetually enslaving black people called the Confederacy. That's what it was, you see. But it was a different moment because, of course, you end up trying to reunite by scapegoating those cast as other. 6 million under U.S. aegis with Philippines, Guam, Hawaii, people of color. Internally, here comes white supremacy by another name. No longer slavery, but Jim Crow. So a union took place, a reunion, a coming together took place, but at the expense of those scapegoated. Which means, of course, you're going to have to come back and deal with that problem in the 1960s. You had the leadership of Abe Lincoln and others of such high quality that he was willing to grow. First inaugural address, I'm open to slavery being perpetuated forever. Frederick Douglass saying, I'm moving to Haiti. I don't want to live in a republic in which black people are enslaved permanently. Lincoln was open to that. In that sense, he was improvisational. He changes, he grows, he matures, he learns how to die and says, I was wrong. We're going to not just win, we're going to make sure that these black people are emancipated and become citizens overnight, from slaves to citizens. One of the unprecedented moments in the history of modern times. But then Jim Crow sets in, second-class citizens, you see. We don't have those circumstances and conditions these days, you see. But we do need the same raw ingredients. High quality leadership, not just in the White House, not just in the State House, not just in City Hall, but in mosques, churches, synagogues, universities, civic institutions, families. Do we have what it takes? We certainly don't have a Lincoln in the White House. I think we can all agree on that. Even the folk who support him know he's no Abe, you know what I mean? You get off the crack pipe, anybody think he's an Abe Lincoln? But it's not just one individual. Abe Lincoln didn't do it by himself. He had a team. He had hardworking citizens. He had people willing to live and die. And he had the Frederick Douglasses, the Harriet Beecher Stowes, the Harriet Tubmans, and others. That's what we need in order to see whether we can meet the challenge given the fragmentation and the divisions that's facing us today. That's just a beginning of an answer to your very, very powerful question, my dear sister.
You hold on to that. I'm going to take questions from the audience.
While you begin that, I just want to make one additional comment here. Again, this is really for young folks. I stressed at the beginning of my remarks the importance of understanding liberal education as serving non-instrumental values. It's not just for getting ahead, it's not just for getting a good job, it's not just for climbing the ladder of social standing and social prestige. It's for things that are worthwhile in themselves, the inherently enriching and elevating quality of knowledge. The trouble is we live in a culture that is sending you every day the message that there is nothing ultimately worthwhile in itself, that everything is instrumental, that everything is a means. I sometimes call this, not using the term in its technical philosophical sense, but in its colloquial sense, a utilitarian culture. Everything is valued for what it can get you as opposed to being valued in itself. You're getting those messages thrown at you all the time by advertising, by cultural elites. It's a constant thing, and it's hard for any of us, I can speak for myself here, hard for any of us to avoid at some level incorporating that misunderstanding into our thinking. And yet, at some level, all of us know that that's wrong. That while some things are purely instrumentally valuable, there are some things that are intrinsically valuable, inherently enriching. Everybody can recognize that a friendship that amounts to, so-called friendship, that amounts to nothing more than one friend using another, even if there's no injustice, even if they're both using each other, that's not a friendship. It's a so-called friendship. We all know that a real friendship is where one wills the good of the other, acts for the sake of the other, for the sake of the other, and the other equally values oneself for one's own sake. And we all have the experience of those friendships with our parents, for example, with our siblings, with our ordinary friends. So we know that not everything can be reduced to its instrumental value. And liberal arts learning is one of those things. So I think we have to resist the cultural messages that are essentially spewed forth at us all the time, saying something's valuable if and only if it can get you something else. Now, what's the something else that you're taught to want? You're taught to want status, prestige, social standing, respect. People even treat college education as nothing more than a road to those things. What do you want out of college? Even parents sometimes hope for their kids, not the intrinsic value of enriching knowledge. They want for their kids a step up the social ladder. Not bad in itself. But when it puts into the shade the intrinsic value of learning, then there is a loss. And this goes back to the question, what makes life worth living? The question that your liberal arts education really is teaching you to ask. What makes life worth living is not social standing. That's nice if you can have it. It's nice to be a prestigious person. It's not wealth. It's nice to have money. It's nice to have a lot of money. But it's far less important than things money can't buy. It's not just a cliche to say that there are some things, the truly important things that money can't buy. That's true. And yet, in this culture, so often we are taught that ultimately the most important thing, the thing that's actually worth spending your time on, worth spending your energy on, worth worrying about, is becoming wealthy. Often becoming wealthy not out of sheer greed, but because in our culture wealth has attached to it status, prestige, standing. Okay, end of sermon, and Colleen, over to our audience.
This gentleman over here, please.
Thank you so much, both of you. This has been fascinating and really inspiring. My question is, so you guys both cited MLK and Dorothy Day and figures like that, and it seems to me that a lot of organizations that make possible events like this, whether it's Witherspoon or ISI or some of these other ones, presuppose the kind of liberalism and free market capitalism that both MLK and Dorothy Day critiqued very heavily. So what do we do with that as people committed to liberal learning, but who are concerned about the systems that make it apparent?
Yeah, well, this is a point on which Cornel and I are not in perfect harmony, although we're not in complete disagreement. I'm a believer in the market economy. I believe the market economy has lifted millions of people out of poverty, and that we're much better off as a society in virtue of having the market economy than we would be with a command economy. I think the record of actual socialism is a record of tyranny as well as impoverishment. I've never been one, and to his very great credit, Cornel has never been one to, for example, glorify Cuba as some kind of socialist utopia. It's a land of tyranny and political imprisonment and so forth. And yet, I do not accept the laissez-faire capitalist doctrine. It seems to me that the common good, traditionally conceived in common law jurisdictions like the United States as the protection of public health, safety, and morals and the advancement of the general welfare, not only permits but requires regulation of markets. For example, there are some things that money ought not to be able to buy. There's some things that should not be on the market. There are values that are appropriate for the market economy, non-market values, that should not be that should be honored in the non-market situation, in families and in friendships and in other institutions that are not governed by market principles. And we should not permit, which we often do, and this is that utilitarian ethic that I'm complaining about, when we should not permit market values to be moved over into familial situations, into friendship situations where everything gets marketized, things that shouldn't be in the market. Now, Cornel can speak for himself, but my guess is, from past experience, that he's not going to say we need to get rid of the market. He's going to say we need to regulate the market properly. And I think I'm going to let him speak for himself now, but I think the real debate is what are the proper regulations? To what extent and what are the specifics of what the regulations of the market ought to be?
Neither of us is for the unregulated market, but neither thinks that we should shift out of a market economy to a command economy. But you say you're...
Yeah, but no, I appreciate the question, because the crucial thing is that one enacts what the Greeks call parrhesia, P-A-R-R-H-E-S-I-A, which is plain speech, frank speech, fearless speech, unintimidated speech. And line 24a of Plato's Apology, when Socrates says, parrhesia was the cause of my unpopularity. He was condemned to death because of his frank speech, his plain speech, his fearless speech, his unintimidated speech. Now, we can say the same thing in the legacy of Jerusalem, though Amos and Jeremiah say it with tears. Socrates never cries. That's the problem he's got. You see, the legacy of Jerusalem begins with tears, but you still have frank speech, fearless speech. So when we have these dialogues, whoever invites anybody, the voices must be raised to say, well, you invoke Dorothy Day and Martin King and Heschel and others. These people put their lives on the line over some of the issues that you are hiding and concealing. That fearless speech is required. That's very important. You all got a love warrior coming next week named Diane Nash, right? She's a giant. She's not just a polished professional. She's not a market-driven, glitzy celebrity person. She is a love warrior that was willing to put her life on the line, and she's still at it. And in the dialogue with her, let's deal with empire. Let's deal with patriarchy. Let's deal with homophobia. Let's deal with transphobia. What are the ideologies that lose sight of the humanity of people? Let's deal with anti-Jewish ideology that loses sight of Jewish brothers and sisters, or anti-Arab that loses sight of Arab brothers and sisters, the Muslims, the Palestinians, anybody else. Let's raise our voices, just like you raised your voice. That's what you want. But we have to be honest and candid, which means even with Socrates, you got to out-Socratize Socrates. Be critical of him. Same is true of any event that one has at Vanderbilt, Princeton, or what have you. Raise the questions that are often hidden and concealed. And the best of a liberal arts education is bring it on. Let's see what your argument is. Where's your evidence? What does a critique of liberalism look like? What does a critique of patriarchy look like? And so forth and so on. You see the point I'm making? It's a very important question.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for being here. My question is on the growing emergence of postmodern philosophies on college campuses and how that's impacting civic friendship, particularly on the changing nature of what it means to hold a student protest and how they're different from the protests that went around on, say, the Vietnam War, and what we can do about that or what it means.
Good. Well, thank you for that question. So, again, I'll begin with a little autobiography. I'm a critic of postmodernist philosophy and ideology. But I understand the power of it, and I believe it needs to be engaged. I don't want to shut down postmodern philosophy any more than I think postmodern philosophy should be allowed to shut down other competing views. And no one can doubt the power of the philosophies of people like Heidegger and Nietzsche that are informing postmodern criticism. So I do think it's very important to engage it. Now, here's one of the problems. I don't have time to do my whole critique, but one of the problems that's relevant directly to your question. If you have a philosophy or ideology that assumes in advance of the argument that argument itself is nothing but rhetoric designed to justify or impose power or alter power relations, it's hard to get an argument off the ground, because argument does have certain conditions. That's why it's hard to argue with a Nazi. It's hard to argue with an actual racist. You know, you can accuse people of being racist, you accuse people of being Nazis when they're not, as a way of trying to shut down debate. But with a real Nazi or a real racist, or somebody who insists that argument, reason, has no real power, all so-called argument is rhetoric designed to impose or designed to alter power relations, where can you go with that? What the presupposition, there's no point in having this argument. So the argument becomes an argument about the presuppositions themselves. The defense that's needed and that I would try to provide is the defense of the Socratic view of reasoning and argument as truth attaining. We can never fully get at the truth. Our efforts to get at the truth will always be admixed with some measure of error because we're fallible, we're limited, we're finite. And yet, I think the record shows that we can make progress toward truth, including truth about justice, truth about rights, truth about the common good. We can get at truth by argument, where argument cannot be just written off as an attempt to impose, using rhetorical techniques to impose on others or to alter power relations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that question is difficult to answer because what we mean by postmodern philosophy, you can imagine, we got to unpack that. There's so many different voices and viewpoints and so on. I think the dominant orientation in most postmodern thinkers is to be very skeptical about Western philosophical's quest for truth because it's been unwilling to be fully truthful about its quest for truth. Well, I like that. That's a kind of suspicion that's very important. I think it's Socratic. It's not nothing radical, you know, postmodern, oh, we decentering so-and-so. No, you're just another skeptic. And skepticism is always important. There's a truth in skepticism. The problem is there's a critical pole and there's a constructive pole. The skeptics are very good in the criticism. David Hume was even more rigorous in his skepticism than Jacques Derrida, but the French don't understand that. But the constructive pole, okay, now given that critique and the suspicion, how are you going to live, what are you going to do, what are you going to hope for, how are you going to laugh, love, and so forth. That's a constructive, that's something else, you see. That's a Whitehead had already descended and provided certain constructive things too. Is he postmodern? Hard to say, what do you mean? You see, is Wittgenstein, so the issue of what do we do with skepticism? And then what kinds of practices follow therefrom in regard to student protests. You see, there's still going to be a need to respect different views. There's going to be always the acknowledgement of the right of people to protest, absolutely. But when you start just shutting people down, well, see, that's nothing postmodern about that. Nothing modern or pre-modern. That's just shutting something down. You say, now, what kind of argument do you have for shutting somebody down as opposed to a protest outside and then bringing critique to bear? Now, if you're bringing in someone of very low quality, then that's a whole different thing, and that's up to the student groups, that's up for the institution. There's a difference between bringing in a highly sophisticated conservative thinker and, what's his name, Milosh, whatever his name is. You know, I mean, you know, good God Almighty, let him go on and stay out in the street and do his thing. He doesn't deserve to be in Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt got too many serious folk and only got so many slots in a semester. Bring in the serious conservative thinkers. Bring in the serious leftist thinkers. Bring in the serious liberal thinkers. Let's go at it Socratically. Be skeptical, but also be concerned about constructive possibilities. Then, whether it's postmodern or not, we're getting at the substantive issues.
Yeah, it seems to me you want to avoid any shutting down of visiting speakers of any sort, but which Cornel agrees with me on. But he's also made a good point that those who are responsible, student groups, faculty members, administrators, for inviting speakers to campus should have a quality criterion. Now, the good news is, if you're open-minded, everybody recognizes that there are high-quality people, deep thinkers, who are prepared to defend publicly a wide range of points of view from the left all the way to the right. It's not hard, if you're a serious person, to recognize good scholarship, good thinking, deep thinking, powerful thinking across a spectrum. So there are lots of people to choose from. But there's far less to be gained, if there's anything at all to be gained, by bringing in just somebody who's a provocateur, somebody who's just here to cause trouble and raise a ruckus and get people upset. There's far less value in that than there is in bringing in somebody who's got something serious to say. Cornel mentioned Milo. Contrast Milo,
who should have the right to speak like everybody else. But contrast him with Roger Scruton, if that name means anything to you. Now, if it doesn't mean anything to you, okay, good. Now, there's a serious man with something very serious to say. Now, he's going to be criticizing some of the same aspects of liberal ideology that somebody like Milo would criticize. But you're going to get a much more powerful, engaging argument, serious argument from Roger Scruton. So exercising wisdom there, not because we don't want people upset and we don't want people discombobulated. We, in fact, do want people upset and discombobulated at a certain level. The whole point of the intellectual enterprise is to unsettle all of us. But we want the best possible reasons and arguments to be made available to everybody in our campus community so that they can, in the end, decide for themselves where the truth is to be found.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. We're quickly coming to a close here out of mercy for our guests who've been working incredibly hard all day long. I'm going to take one more brief question, and Cornel and Robbie, if you want to answer it as briefly as you like, it's up to you. Yes, sir, over here.
I just wanted to touch on, you said that we all have truths that we believe in, or we all have beliefs that we think are true, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily true. I was just wondering, what's a belief that you hold that you often question the truth in?
Oh, I question the truth of a lot of my, in fact, sorry. Yeah. I question the truth of a lot of my beliefs. We have a range of policy issues in the United States: economic policy, foreign policy, and of course domestic policy issues, some of which are of profound moral significance. I think all of those are on the line. Take one that I care very deeply about and have devoted much of my career to, the question of abortion. I'm strongly pro-life. I've written, including books, on the subject. I've read all the serious scholarship, all the serious work that I have been able to find that I know on the subject, including, indeed, especially work by people who are on the other side of that question. My colleague Peter Singer, for example, at Princeton, I've carefully read his work, and we've engaged each other personally on that issue. It's because that I recognize that despite the depth of my commitment on that issue, my belief in the sanctity of human life, the inherent dignity of the life of every member of the human family, including the child in the womb, despite that, I recognize that I'm fallible. I could be wrong about that. And the only way I'm going to figure out whether I am right or wrong is to engage the very best arguments that have been made on the other side, like those made by Professor Singer, or by Marianne Warren, or by Judith Jarvis Thompson. Those of you who have studied the abortion debate will recognize these names. Now, having done that, at least so far, I found myself reinforced in my pro-life convictions, not having them overturned. But that doesn't mean that I can now stop and not listen to anybody on the other side and just assume everybody on the other side is just a dummy or is in bad faith and doesn't have anything interesting to say. I'm still eager to read anything that anybody produces on the other side, not just so that I can refute it, but so that I can consider it and think about whether it in fact might be right and should move me from the position that I'm in on the subject. Being a serious intellectual, which is not something just for professors, it's something all of us should aspire to be, no matter what our professions are. All of us should aspire to be serious intellectually. Being serious intellectually means being willing to have your deepest, most cherished, even identity-forming beliefs on the table all the time. And we hate doing that. It's tough, because we do wrap our emotions so tightly around our convictions. But it's a great, great blessing if we manage to do it. It's a blessing for ourselves as truth seekers. It's ennobling and elevating of ourselves as human beings. And it's a blessing for our larger community. How about you, Cornel?
I would forego my time just to have one or two more questions. Is that all right? So I won't say a word and let you raise your question. And then I can come back. Or maybe we have two in a row. Neither one of us will say anything. Then we'll answer two. But I don't know if we can have 4, though, because we do. So is that all right, my dear sister?
It sure is.
There, right. I'll go right ahead, though.
Thank you, Dr. West. Dr. George, you spoke earlier about. Oh, question for you? Or?
Oh, no, you ask whatever questions on your heart and soul and mind, though, brother.
Thank you, sir. All right. I think both of you, but Dr. George, the word you had used earlier was about factionalism and tribalism. And it strikes me that the election both of President Obama and of President Trump has called on us to have an important conversation for different reasons for both of those two men, an important conversation about the way that our society has always been driven by a certain kind of factionalism, of the rich against the poor, of whites against blacks, of men against women. And the university today, to me, sometimes seems a microcosm for this important but very difficult situation. And I was wondering what way you see forward for the university, especially since it's one of the most powerful and important forces we have to fight the most regressive elements of our society. Thank you.
Well, on so many issues, reasonable people of goodwill disagree about what actually does constitute progress and what constitutes regress. And that's just a brute fact we have to deal with. Reasonable people of goodwill disagree about even profound moral questions like the sanctity of human life. We can't just assume that all the good guys are on one side and all the bad guys are on the other side. There's only good arguments for one side, and there's no arguments worth taking seriously on the other side. There have always been factions, but we have had periods of greater and less civic friendship. And we're in a period in which civic friendship is deteriorating. That makes it more like the period leading up to the Civil War than is comfortable for us. And that's why I think Professor Sheehan was right to raise that question and even to raise the history of the Civil War. We need people, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, who are willing to break with the clan, with the tribe, with the group, with the school of thought, the party, to criticize, when warranted, leaders of their own party. It's enormously to Professor West's credit that he was a leading, outspoken critic of President Obama. I have been, for what it's worth, a pretty ferocious critic of President Trump. I wish I didn't have to be. I wish he'd do things that I approved of more. He's done some things that I approve of. President Obama did some things that Professor West approved of. But there were other things that we each felt it necessary to call a leader of our own party out on. Now that immediately causes people to accuse you of being a betrayer, being Judas Iscariot, giving aid and comfort to the enemy. We both experienced that, me as a Trump critic, Professor West as a critic of President Obama and of Secretary of State Clinton, whom he did not support in the election. I did not support President Trump. But we actually need more of that. It shouldn't be unusual or shocking or scandalous to find a Republican willing to criticize a Republican president or a Democrat willing to criticize a Democratic president. And even within the academic community, since you focused the question there, it needs to become a lot more common for a student or faculty member who is identified in some way within the community in some kind of public way with one ideological camp of the other to show some independence, to say, you know what, I'm not going along with the Democrats and the liberals on this one. They're not right 100% of the time. This happens to be one of the times they're not right. If you think your tribe is right all the time on everything, I would begin to get suspicious, because that's not the way human affairs work. Given human fallibility, we're fallible not just as individuals, but in groups. And yet, there's a lot of pressure on people to conform, to be a team player, to go along, not to give aid and comfort to the enemy.
No, I would say that somewhere I read that there's a motto of an institution that reads Veritas, Unitas, Caritas. That ain't no joke. Truth, unity, love, charity in the deepest sense. Are we serious about the quest for those three? Isn't that something that would help us deal with struggles between rich and poor, class struggles, strata struggles, regional struggles, empire vis-a-vis less powerful nations, youth vis-a-vis the elderly, black and white, black and brown, yellow and red, and so forth and so on? That's what ought to be the raw stuff that we're wrestling with in a liberal arts education if we're concerned about cultivating this kind of critical self and compassionate self and a mature self. But you're so right. I mean, if in fact Villanova or Princeton or Harvard acted as if there was no tensions between the rich and the poor, you can be assured that they're living in some kind of isolated silo, a bubble that has very little sense of what the world is like. That was true in 1842 when the Augustinians founded this institution. And it's true in 2018. Has there been progress? Absolutely. But Malcolm X says what? You don't stab folk in the back 9 inches, pull it out 6 inches, and celebrate your progress. And Malcolm said you got work to do. He's absolutely right. I know we got one more query. I'm so sorry about the last two, but I think, we got a brother over here. I didn't see you on the left. I'm usually looking to my left. I appreciate you. Ask your question, my brother.
Thank you. Thank you both for your time. My name is Cliff Porter. I'm a junior studying rhetoric as a specialization of communication. I wanted to ask you, Dr. West, you were talking about unity and brotherhood across racial lines. I'm curious about tactics to encourage unity within racial groups, specifically the Black community. How do we encourage that interrogation of doctrine and dogma that you talked about, unite our own community, all while that doctrine is teaching us that we aren't worth being united with and that we aren't worth that kinship?
Appreciate that, my brother, very much so. I mean, one thing is that by example, you have got to be, all of us, but I try to do in my own life, to be fundamentally committed to a quest for unarmed truth and unconditional love of people, but beginning with Black people. You see, I'm always suspicious of Black folk who love everybody but Black people. Something pathological about that. You might be able to go high in the power structure, but something pathological about it. It's just a reinforcement of the white supremacy that tries to convince Black people that we're less beautiful, less intelligent, less moral, and ought to be deferring to a white supremacist power structure. So you got to convince Black folk, just like Diane Nash next week. You're going to see the love flowing through her soul, every word, for love for Black people. But when you love people, you not only hate the fact they're being treated unfairly, but you respect and correct. You respect them as human beings and as a Christian made in the image of God like any other human being. But also you correct in terms of your Socratic criticism. You see. So if I'm going to be critical of Obama, I'm saying, look, I'm thoroughly convinced that Wall Street friendly policies and bailing them out as opposed to bailing homeowners out has something to do with my love for poor and working people, including chocolate ones. His policy went the other way. Here comes my critique. Get ready, Barack. It's coming at you. Why is a Black man criticizing another Black man? I've been doing that all my life. I got cousins. What do you think we talk about at Thanksgiving dinner? I love my mama. I'll take a bullet for my mama. I'm Socratic sometimes with my mama. That doesn't trump my love. And it certainly doesn't trump my love for Black people. It doesn't trump my love for Barack Obama. People say, how could you love Barack and be so harsh on him? It's called tough love. Sometimes you are harsh in harsh conditions. You're not polite all the time when the conditions are harsh and they're being overlooked and downplayed, you see. That's part of the legacy of Malcolm, too. So how do you create some kind of possibility of Socratic dialogue within the black context? By example. Take the heat. Deal with the consequences of being misunderstood, but be consistent, and most importantly, always be there. You see, if you're struggling in Charlottesville, show up. Folk catching hell in Ferguson, show up and go to jail. If they're mistreating folk in Baltimore, show up. Not in order to be highly visible, but because this is the kind of human being I choose to be, to try to bear some witness. And for me, it has everything to do with what it means to be a Christian in the world, but not of it. So I learned in Vacation Bible School that the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. And that heaven has to do with witness, words, sound, painting, what kind of heaven behind, tied to a love. And justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. How much tenderness are you leaving? How much love are you leaving? How much truth-telling? How much caritas, unitas, veritas are you leaving behind? That, to me, is a way of life. It's not just a matter of talking about it. And in that sense, black unity, peoples of color unity, women's unity, male unity, Jewish unity, Palestinian unity, and then how do you transcend all of those divisions for common humanity, common good, and common conversation or common inquiry? Because in the end, we really are talking about, what it means to be human. I'm open to animals, especially elephants. So it's not just human beings, it's sentient beings, but that's another issue in terms of how we treat animals. But I know it's getting late.
Yeah, just a very quick comment on that question, if I could be permitted. I think it's very important that we not send messages to members of particular ethnic or racial demographics, or send messages within these demographics, that if you are a member of this group, this is your skin color, this is your ethnicity, you are expected to think in a certain way for the sake of the unity of the group. People are people. They are entitled to their opinions. They're entitled to dissent and shouldn't be expected to hew to a certain line, politically, religiously, ideologically, philosophically, in virtue of race or ethnicity or every other demographic marker. There is a wide diversity of opinion within the black community, within various Asian communities, within various Hispanic communities. Often these communities themselves are very diverse, and even within the smaller units within them, there's a diversity of opinions. One of the interesting things today is on class. The way we vote is not that the rich people vote one way and the poor people vote another way. Very often you got a lot of poor people and a lot of rich people on both sides voting either for the Democrat or for the Republican. If you look at recent elections, President Obama did very well, especially in his first election, among very affluent people. Donald Trump did very well among a lot of very less than affluent people. There's a great complexity of political views out there, not only in the community as a whole, but among the various demographic groups. Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you. Before we conclude, folks, I want to extend a very special thank you to Steve McGuire, Austin Detweiler, and John Guerra, my colleagues at the Ryan Center, who did a tremendous amount of work to put this event together. And I feel I'm reminded of Lincoln when he said, I'm loath to close. I'm loath to close. We cannot be enemies. We must be friends. Thank you, Robbie and Cornel, for such a thoughtful, provocative, lively, and inspiring conversation. Thanks.